Our Homes, Our Votes, our Iowa campaign. We're so excited that you're all here because this is actually our first Housing and Wages, thanks to Fight for 15 Town Hall. We're so excited to get things started, so here we go. Thanks for being here. All right, so we are going to kick things off with Lindsay Ellickson, and she is from Waypoint Services. She's a housing specialist. She's going to talk a little bit about the situation here, what she sees on the ground in Cedar Rapids.
My name is Lindsay, and for a little bit of backstory on kind of why I do what I do. When I was growing up, actually, for a short period of time, did live in Section 8 housing with my mom, who has a very severe mental illness. And when I went to college and had my own daughter, who many of you know, Adeline, she comes with me to a lot of different political events. I lived in affordable housing as well. Housing is a huge issue for me because of that, because living in affordable housing allowed me and my family to be able to support ourselves while I went to college and I finished my degree in social work, and I was actually able to help other people. While I was doing my degree for social work, I actually did my first internship at Willis Davey. I got my degree from social work at Mount Mercy locally here. I did my first internship at Willis Davey, and I just loved working with individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And then I did my second internship where I work now at Waypoint. Probably the biggest factor that I see with trying to get people who are currently homeless in housing is the lack of available housing stock in Cedar Rapids, or lack of housing stock that is affordable within their budget, and housing that also will be willing to work with individuals who might have mental health issues, who might have criminal backgrounds, might have eviction histories. And so housing is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. I've had clients who have come in and told me that they believe that they don't deserve housing. And that's why I'm wearing the shirt that I am today, because I genuinely believe that housing is a human right. Housing is something that allowed me to grow up, to be able to help people, to work in social work, to be able to be an activist, to be able to do all the things that I've been able to do. And so housing is probably one of the biggest issues in that's just the most important and near and dear to my heart for me. So I want to thank everyone for coming out here. I appreciate everyone for coming out here and listening to Julian talk about housing today. So.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. All right, super excited to introduce now Councilwoman Ashley Van Orney. I think I got that last name right. And since being elected to City Council, she's been a great advocate of foster children, low-income families, and diversity in the community. So I'll let her speak to how she's been doing that on City Council. Please welcome Ashley Van Orney.
That's always really important to me. And secondly, I'd really like to thank Secretary Castro for coming back and visiting us here in Cedar Rapids. Yeah. So housing is something that's really important, because if you look at Nassau's hierarchy of needs, right, it's one of the basic needs. But we are failing, okay? And I say this because I'm working every single day to try and address these issues, but we're still failing. We've got people who are sleeping on the streets, who know the nooks and crannies of where people won't bother them. That's a problem. Is it okay that every single winter we struggle to find something that complies with our building codes, that we can put people up? They're citizens too. They deserve all the same rights, like Lindsay said, which, by the way, Lindsay was my neighbor, one of my first constituents, and I grew up next to the housing project that Lindsay lived in. I never realized it was a housing project because there was all my playmates at school when I went to Wilson, just up the street. And so I never really thought about it like that. I was like, oh, that's where my friends live, you know? But it gets a bad rap. But one thing that I'll tell you about housing projects or affordable housing networks is that it's a true network. If you haven't experienced one, if you don't know people who live in one, you will never see a more tight-knit community than you will there, because everybody knows everybody's business in a good way. They know all the kids that they can help out with, all the things that, it really is back to the basics of being able to lend somebody a cup of sugar. I mean, that's how tight-knit that community is. And so I loved being able to grow up to that because I have that perspective. But one of the things that is a struggle is not only taking care of people at the most severe needs, who do not have housing at all, but we also have people who are struggling just to find housing that they can stay in. Because even if you can get on the waiting list, can get through all the bureaucracy of that, then you have to do everything perfectly. Because if they don't, what's going to happen is just down the street from me, they're going to throw your shit out on the street. I've seen it time and time again my entire life. Lindsay knows this is one of the biggest things that just breaks my soul. Because what are you supposed to do? If you messed up because you either couldn't afford your rent that week or month or whatever the case might be, and I know I'm not enough financially stable. I can come up here and look nice and have showered and look great for you all, but I'm not financially secure enough to say that I'm not that I'm not that far off from that myself, time to time, okay? And the problem then is that when you have that perspective and then you realize that, okay, now somebody's down on their luck, okay, whatever, they didn't comply with the rules, so now they lost their housing. So now all their worldly possessions are out on the street. But do you think that they have time to take a break from their job to protect their possessions so that they can find housing? Because I can tell you my experience with children in foster care is that if we've had a child who is aged out of foster care and something happened, they've lost their housing, we usually have to put them up in a hotel for about 3 weeks before we can get them back into housing. And do you know how difficult it is with the regulations of being under 25 and trying to rent a hotel room in your own name? You can't do it. So you have to have somebody with some of the groups that I'm in do that on their behalf and kind of wheel and deal with them. Put down some extra deposits and stuff like that. What are these people supposed to do? So that's why I say we're failing, because this is something that's consistently happening. And yet I'm supposed to, I'm only in a part-time role in city council, and I'm supposed to be here, making sure that people have shelter, but we don't have enough shelters for them. We don't have enough housing that's affordable. And we just had recently in our development committee, we had a perspective that we did every couple of years that talked about baby boomers, as they retire, the lack of senior and skilled care housing that we're going to have. It's going to be a real problem. We are very deficient here in Cedar Rapids. And it's not the sexiest thing to build. So you can't get a lot of people who are interested in doing that, which is tough, right? Because it's not profitable. Because you're having Medicare or Medicaid paid for it, generally. So what do? Right? The other thing that we struggle with is trying to find housing for felons. One thing that I just did recently in a restorative justice initiative that I'm working on is try to reduce the barriers that we have just for housing vouchers. So I don't know if you know this, but HUD Housing actually requires you to have at least 1 year post fulfilling your felony sentence that you're not allowed to receive vouchers. Des Moines, theirs is 10 years. Cedar Rapids was 5. I tried to get it back to 1 because I didn't want to be the barrier, but I got it to 3. So now at least maybe we're going to get a better assessment of how many people have not even attempted to apply because they heard that no. Now I have to say that we have amazing city staff, and they have consistently overridden the rules to make exceptions for people who are have not fulfilled 5 years after, even before we just reduced that. But I told them, I said, the reason that I want to fight for it to be lower is because there's so many people who are going to see that and just not even apply. Because they're just like, well, I've been told no all my life. They're going to say no again. So at least we're going to get a better number. But my understanding, and I hope that I'm still accurate on my numbers here, is that the last time we still had 11,000 people in Cedar Rapids that were on that waiting list. Where are they supposed to go? So then you see houses where people are double, triple families up, and you're like, God, they're just got so many people in there, all the aunties, uncles, everybody. Well, do you know why? It's because they can't find housing. They can't find housing that they can afford with rules that are humane, so that somebody's going to get kicked out on the street because they're down on their luck. Because I was over at EduState not too recently, hanging out with my friend Nate over there. And a gentleman that was a skateboarder of his came in, and he's like, hey, how you doing, man? I said, well, I just got a job. Really good one, Whirlpool. But I'm living in my car. And it was Easter weekend, and the hypocrisy of it being Easter weekend when we're all sitting here putting on our fancy dresses, going to church, feeling real good about ourselves, and I couldn't find one psychologist to be able able to see this person who's struggling with mental health. I worked with Will Estady to get him housing, but the reality is, he's got a dog. So now you gotta find shelter that allows a dog, that needs papers to verify the dog. You see where you've got problems here? So I really appreciate that Julian's here to talk more about housing, because as HUD Secretary under President Obama, he understood this intimately. And so that's what I'm here to say. I understand the problems that we have here in Cedar Rapids. I'm committed to wading through the weeds on this, because we've got a problem and we have to stay vigilant about addressing it. I'm trying to get more people to understand that housing is sexy, that we need to get people to put money towards this, because we need to take care of everybody so we don't have people who are relying on those nooks and crannies to just stay safe at night, so that hopefully, fingers crossed, they don't freeze during our winters. We all know how bad this last winter was. You want to camp outside? I don't. So I appreciate you all listening to me today. If you are interested in doing more housing initiatives and efforts in the Cedar Rapids area specifically, please see me after. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over. But I'm really excited that you're here today, Julian, and I hope to hear more from you.
For also saying thank you for being such a housing champion in your time in City Council. It's a voice that's much needed. So, with that, I will not make you wait too much longer to listen to Secretary Castro, but I will quickly talk about this project that we're starting. So it's called Our Homes, Our Votes, Our Iowa, and it's a nonpartisan project that is a partnership between the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and the Polk County Housing Trust Fund. So this was actually announced just over a week ago, so you're really the first people to get a glimpse of it. We'll be hosting town halls, roundtable discussions, other types of events across the state of Iowa to elevate the discussion of housing in the 2020 election. And we're so excited to be here in Cedar Rapids to kick things off. And without further ado, I cannot wait to hear what Secretary Castro has to say about housing. Of course, Julian Castro was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under the Obama administration, and prior to that was the Mayor of San Antonio, Texas. So without further ado, please welcome Secretary Castro.
Good afternoon. How are y'all doing? First of all, let me say a huge thank you to Lauren and to everybody who's launched this Our Homes, Our Votes, Our Iowa initiative. I was in Milwaukee yesterday. I visited this Midwest country mobile home park. And y'all may have read about their situation. A few months ago, they got a notice that a new owner of that mobile home park wanted to raise the rents by 69%. And Matt is here, was there yesterday when he had a chance to show me around, and we met a woman named Arletta, who's 92 years old, and very proud of her home, and she's lived there for 40 years since it opened. She was saying that she was one of the first 11 residents of the neighborhood. And that situation for them, and I want to commend Matt and Arletta, all of the residents, for the way they band together, their activism to try and push back against this company and the increased cost, including going down to the state capitol and trying to push for legislation. But this is emblematic of the problem that we have with a rental affordability crisis in the United States. And I'm happy to be here to talk about this, not only because it's what I did for 2.5 years as HUD Secretary, and part of what I did as Mayor of San Antonio, but also, most importantly, because so many American families are grappling with this issue, but we don't talk about it enough on the campaign trail. If you were to go through the transcripts of the debates for the last 40 or 50 years, I bet, Republican and Democrat, and look at those transcripts, I bet that not one time has a candidate been asked in a major debate about their plan to address housing supply and affordability. Even though families all across the country, here in Iowa, in my home state of Texas, every state in the union are grappling with it. In fact, as as many people here know today, we have more and more families that are paying 50, 60, 70% of their income in rent. And there are a lot of communities that are still getting over the housing crisis that we had a decade or so ago, where our home ownership rate went to its lowest level in 40 years. And you combine a low home ownership rate that we still have with a rental affordability crisis, and over the last 40 years, basically a declining federal commitment to meet that challenge. And what we're dealing with are more people that are having to double up in the homes of relatives, more people that are sleeping in their cars. I was in Oakland about 3 or 4 weeks ago and visiting a middle school, and one of the administrators there told me about a teacher that revealed to them last year that she was sleeping in her car. We have more people that are sleeping in shelters. We also have more unsheltered homelessness in this country over the last couple of years. And during this campaign, I've been talking about what we want to become in the United States. I believe that we want to become a nation that works together to be the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. If we want to be the most prosperous nation on earth, it has to mean prosperity for everybody. And so I've been talking about what we need to do specifically on the issue of housing to get there. On Monday, I'm going to release my affordable housing plan. And I know a couple of candidates have done that already. And so I'm excited that already there's a greater conversation about this. I hope that that translates into the debates on June 26th and 27th. I know that everybody here will be watching. Right? If you've taken the time to come here today and be here, then you're going to be watching, I'm sure. I hope that they ask questions of the candidates on that, and I'm proud that by that time people will have seen my plan. Let me just say very briefly a couple of things, and then I really want to spend time answering questions from folks. Number one, when we think about how to meet this challenge, we have to understand that this affects people in the middle class, the working poor, and people who are the poorest of the poor in this country. There are traditional tools that we should be amping up, like the low-income housing tax credit and community development block grant, CDBG, that many folks are probably familiar with here, and home funding that has existed since about 1992. CDBG was 1974. There are also newer things that we should be expanding, like the National Housing Trust Fund. And I want to thank Diane Yeno from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. They have been phenomenal and instrumental in making sure that Congress and administrations, whether Democrat or Republican, pay attention to these issues. But the National Housing Trust Fund was special because it was stood up in 2015 specifically to provide new revenue for people who were extremely low income, basically people who were making less than 30% of the area median income. And it started off very modestly at $173 million nationally. That's nothing for the nation. That is a lot of money, but it's not when you consider the need. But we can expand that type of program that's aimed at the people who have the biggest gap when it comes to being able to get into a safe, decent, affordable place. We're also going to propose some new approaches, like refundable tax credits for renters that could be paid out on a monthly basis, like expanding vouchers, housing choice vouchers, and remembering that all of these dots are connected. So just let me tell you a quick story. I got elected to city council in San Antonio when I was 26. And when I was 26 or 27, not too long after I got elected, I was at this neighborhood meeting. And at the neighborhood meeting, we were talking about the budget that was coming up. And a woman that was in her 30s, late 30s or early 40s, came up to me right after the meeting, and she asked me if I could get money put in the budget to put sidewalks on the street that her mom lived on, which was in my district. She said that her mom, who of course was elderly, had lived on that same street for 30 years, but that she had been recently diagnosed with diabetes. And her doctor had suggested that she get out and walk around the neighborhood, which she could, to improve her circulation. But her daughter that was talking to me said that her mom couldn't do that because there were no sidewalks on the streets around there. So she couldn't get around safely. And for me, as a young policymaker at that time, 26, 27 years old. It was the first time that the light bulb went off of how these things are connected. A simple investment in infrastructure, something as basic as sidewalks, with somebody's health, with safety, and with the overall quality of life in a neighborhood and a community. All of these issues that we're talking about, housing, right, where you live often determines the kind of education that your child can get. If you have a safe, decent, affordable place to live, we found with Housing First, for instance, for people who are homeless, that it immediately provides the stability that people need to be able to focus on an employment issue, or a mental health issue, or another issue that they're grappling with, that perhaps may have been one of the reasons that they found themselves homeless. It also often impacts things like whether you have access to fresh food, because you have a lot of communities where you have these food deserts, where fast food instead of fresh food becomes their food of choice out of necessity. So as we talk about the issue of housing, I saw when I was HUD Secretary, and I visited 100 different communities in 39 different states, I saw very clearly that as housing goes, as we deal with where people live and how they live, it also addresses the ability of people to get ahead in our country, the kind of education that they can get, the kind of job opportunities that they can get, the environment that they grow up in. Are they breathing clean air? Are they drinking clean water? I was in Flint, Michigan, about a week ago to look at the progress that has been made since the Flint water crisis, and also hear about the progress that still needs to be made. And I proposed a plan 2 days later to address ending lead poisoning as a major public health threat in our country. But that too relates to housing. Houses that are old from before 1978, and how we can remediate some of the lead contamination issues in that. So I want to thank you all for having me. Let me just say that what I would like is, first of all, in this campaign, I would like to see us tackle this issue of housing in a big way, for people to put forth substantive ideas, and more importantly, in the years to come, that we work with Congress to make the kind of investments we need to make so that people don't have to struggle the way that they are now. I believe fundamentally that housing is a human right, and that we ought to treat it that way. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here today, and I look forward to your questions. I think we have a mic.
We do.
All right.
Let's do some questions quickly.
I'm very concerned when I see what appear to be homeless people. I see them staying in the park. I'll see them in the wintertime spending their time in the library to stay warm. I'll see them panhandling on the street. What can I do personally to make sure that when I see someone who is homeless, that he never becomes another day without a place?
Thank you very much for the question. You know, earlier I had a little event with some community leaders at the Cedar Rapids library, public library, which is a beautiful library, by the way. I'm sure you all are very proud of it. They told me about how it came about after flooding, but it's a wonderful library. One of the things we talked about, as you all know, is that libraries are not just a place that you check out books anymore. They're really a community resource. And I was speaking to one of the folks that volunteers there, and she was saying that, and she was saying that one of the things they do is that they have somebody there who has spoken with many of the people who are homeless in that area and tried to get them the resources that they need, or connected to the resources they need. And thank you for asking the question of what you can do as a citizen, right? There are different things that you can do. Number one, something that y'all are doing here today is to advocate. You know, people who are poor, people who are homeless on the streets, it goes without saying, they don't have lobbyists at the state capitol. They don't have lobbyists, you know, in Washington, D.C. Diane and others will tell you that this is not, you know, the bankers or other folks that are trying to get the money that they want written into legislation. I mean, it takes people power. So continuing to be a voice for them is important. Secondly, thinking about it, we're able to do it, making even a modest contribution to some of the local organizations that are helping, seeking to help people who are homeless. Whether that's organizations that are like Habitat for Humanity that builds housing in different communities, or some of the nonprofits, also including faith-based charities sometimes that do great work, providing them other resources that they need, whether it's shelter or food or medical supplies, things that help to stabilize them and tide them over until they can have permanent housing, which is what all of us want for people who are homeless. And then also, I think one of the important things is sharing that with other people. Because one of the things that we see is that the willingness to do something on this issue, particularly homelessness, it depends a lot on people in a community resolving together to do something positive. If not, as you know, a lot of times people who are on the streets are ignored. Right? Folks would rather not deal with, a lot of people would rather not deal with them if somebody's panhandling. You know, there's a sort of an urge to not engage. By showing that you are engaging, that you are doing something, I think that that sends a message to all of us, to everyone, that that's what we should be doing.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I did have a question about, you said the lobbyists and people getting a lot of coming to you to go forward and have advertisement for you. Don't you think unions would be good for like little peons, not small peons, or people like me that are working at fast food places? We do try to work, but we're not getting paid what we're supposed to be getting paid. And even if we did, like I used to work for the city, I got $8 an hour. So like, you know, it's very hard to speak if you don't have a union, and you know, kind of unions are like the lobbyists or advocates, you know, stuff like that. So what do you feel about unions? You know, we should be able to have one. If we have a need, we can base our opinions. Our voices would be heard, and everybody gets that done so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I agree. You know, I joined the Fight for 15 movement about 3 weeks ago in Durham, North Carolina, with McDonald's workers were striking. I know that y'all there was an event here and in other cities across the country. To their credit, several of the other candidates also have participated in these events to send a strong message that McDonald's and other companies, not only McDonald's, should pay their workers $15 an hour and should allow them effectively to organize. Because the fact is that they, as you know, they don't have that ability right now, the way that the laws around organizing are structured. So, you know, I believe that unions should be supported. I come from Texas, which unfortunately is a right to work, which basically means right to work for what the employer wants to pay you, stay. However, when I was city councilman in San Antonio, when I was mayor, I was very supportive. At that time, SEIU was organizing the public sector employees in City Hall and also trying to organize nurses. I was very supportive of them and will continue to be supportive of the ability of workers to organize. It is shameful today that only something like 8 or 9% of workers are organized. If more were, then we probably would have better wages and more protections for workers instead of what we see today.
Hi, my name is Angie. I'm from Tax March, Iowa. Tax March started as an actual march on April 15th, 2017. It was tax day. And now it's a movement, working to show lawmakers and presidential candidates that we want wealthy to pay their fair share. Would you reject the Trump tax cuts that gave corporations windfalls? And do you support increasing the taxes on the top 1%? And do you have a plan to repeal?
Thank you very much for that. Y'all probably saw a couple months ago now that it was reported that Amazon made over $11 billion in profit last year, and they paid zero in federal tax. And at the same time, even though the deal fell apart, they were being offered a $3 billion incentive package to relocate or to locate a second headquarters in New York, including, as I understand it, $500 million in direct incentives, in other words, cash, to do that. That fell apart, but that's to give you a sense of the different way that we treat these super wealthy corporations versus ordinary families. What we've been doing for the last 40 years is asking less and less of these big corporations and people at the very top, this top 1%, and more of the middle class and of the working poor. And so I would turn that on its head. I would ensure that we're rewarding people who work for a living and not just wealthy. Here's some of the things that I would do. I would raise the top marginal tax rate.
Yes.
Y'all remember that, and I wouldn't suggest taking it up to this level, but we used to have a top marginal tax rate that was 91%.
I know.
Even when Raygun took over, it was 72%. So for us to suggest that we should raise that beyond what it is now is not radical. Right? If you think about it, Donald Trump says that he wants to, quote, make America great again, in other words, go backward. In those days that he's talking about, the top marginal tax rate was in the 90s. Does he want to go back to that? No. So we need to do that. I would repeal and replace the Trump tax cuts and replace them with legislation that benefits middle class and working poor people in this country, including boosting things like the Earned Income Tax Credit. On Monday, I'm going to release my plan on affordable housing. We're going to talk about refundable renters tax credits. I also believe we need to close other loopholes that are basically the product of industries that are powerful enough to hire the right lobbyists to get legislation written in, sometimes in the dead of night. Y'all have heard about these stories of, 1,000-page legislation that nobody's really read, that has any number of different provisions snuck into it, and then they find out, oh, that's what's in it. Right? But it benefits very specific companies and industries. And you see that over and over and over again. The last thing I'll say, and so I am going to release a plan during the course of this campaign before y'all caucus here in Iowa for the purpose of letting the American people know how I will reward work instead of wealth, and also how we're going to pay for the things that I proposed. Right? Because I believe that that is a legitimate question. I want to ensure that everybody can have Medicare in this country. I want to ensure that we invest in affordable housing. I called for universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. I've said that we need to make a big investment to get to net zero when it comes to our climate. That costs money. And voters have a right to know how you would pay for that. So we're going to release our own plan of how we would pay for those things. And then finally, I'll say that this conversation really speaks to a larger conversation about whether we're going to still be the land of opportunity. That's what we've been known for in this country, right? We didn't always get it right, but generation by generation, we got better. We expanded the ability of different people, no matter what they look like, or their faith, or their sexual orientation, to be able to succeed in this country. And the way that we tax Americans is one way that we ensure, that we should ensure in the future, that everybody, no matter who they are, can rise. You know that there are countries now where you have a greater chance, if you're poor, of becoming wealthy than in the United States. The United States is no longer ranked. It's not at the very top, or even second or third. How do we call ourselves a land of opportunity if somebody is relegated to staying poor? Or even if you start out middle class, you're never able to reach your dreams or go up higher, even if you work hard. We need a country represented by a tax code that allows for that. And that's what I'm going to propose later this cycle. Who gets these questions?
Hi, I'm Julian Castro, and I am the housing director at Waypoint Services, a local nonprofit that offers emergency shelter as well as a rapid housing program. And my question is, what policies do you intend to put in place for those households who do have criminal background and poor rental history, so that they do have options to the affordable housing stock right away?
If they have a criminal background, and what was the second part?
A criminal background and
Poor credit
poor
history?
rental history. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you very much for the question. And let me just start off quickly by saying I'm proud of a lot of the work that we did. And I was there for the last 2.5 years, so will not take anywhere near all the credit for this. Many people in the administration and working in communities across the country did to drive down the numbers on homelessness. Right? I'm sure you saw that during that time, right? By investing in things like rapid rehousing, by working with communities to do housing first and coordinated entry, and the mayor's challenge to end veteran homelessness. Between 2010 and 2016, we saw a 47% reduction in veteran homelessness in our country. That's something that no matter if you're conservative or you're liberal, whatever your party is, or if you're independent, you can be proud of. Right? We accomplished that. And we accomplished that by working together with Congress, with communities across the country. There are also a lot of Americans, because of the regulations that have been in place, who, even if we made these investments, that kind of opportunity would not get to them. And so in 2015, toward the end of the administration, one of the things that we focused on was basically applying, banning the box to the context of public housing and the housing programs that we did. So we sent out guidance, for instance, to housing authorities, that they should no longer just X out people because that person had, from public housing, because, or their voucher programs, because that person had a criminal history. It said that you had to consider in full that person's application. That there were some crimes, if there was a certain type of criminal history, that the housing authority could and should block that person from living in the public housing community. But it should not be automatic. And that there were a number of crimes, part of somebody's criminal record, where they should still be eligible to live in those communities. Obviously, like any other tenant, they would have to demonstrate if they did live there. They'd have to be a good tenant. But this practice that was taken up of 3 strikes you're out, or it was actually 1 strike you're out, not even 3 strikes in the housing context, so 1 strike you're out, or not even considering people, or throwing out whole families because one person in the family had any kind of criminal record. That was wrong. That was not the best policy, and we sought to change that. And I would continue to do that. We also worked on this issue of if somebody had poor credit history or other type of credit or rental history, both trying to develop and support alternative credit measurement, because this is a big problem for a lot of people. A lot of people in this country don't have any credit history that they can go and get an apartment with or make another kind of purchase on credit with. So we wanted to embrace alternative credit methods that took into account if somebody paid their light bill on time, or other types of payments that usually didn't go into the system, the traditional credit system. And to encourage landlords to be able to work a little bit more with families that were struggling, if they weren't able to pay the rent on time. And of course to support rapid rehousing and programs like it, so that when somebody ran into trouble and they were in need, they had emergency, that there were funds there to be able to fill that gap so that they could get back on track. We supported all of those things, and I would support those things as president. Well, we actually have our state director here. We're going to have some folks from the staff. I believe that we may have one person that is going to be here right now. We're building out our staff. Yeah. I know we have folks in Des Moines, Iowa City, coming to Cedar Rapids soon.
Hi, welcome back to Cedar Rapids.
Good to see you. Good.
I'm incredibly concerned about the census and the citizenship question. I've learned so much about how resources are allocated based on the census, but I had no idea. And apparently July 1st is an important deadline. So, if that question remains on the 2020 census, we're going to have to do a lot of educating people that it's okay to answer that question. I guess I'm wondering what your opinions and input and suggestions are.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question very much. And y'all probably saw this week this reporting about the origin of this question. First of all, there was a cabinet secretary that basically lied, seems to have lied about why that question got onto the census in the first place. Some of y'all may have also seen that Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez in a hearing asked some very pointed and good questions about why it was that they skipped all the process that usually goes into putting one of these questions, because that's serious business, right? I mean, a question that goes into the official census form, you know, I mean, one of the things that's true about federal government, and I say this as a former mayor, like I used to think of the mayor's office as sort of the easy button, you know, the Staples easy button, the red button, and then the federal bureaucracy, you know, it gets a lot of good things done, but it is bureaucratic. There are steps that are taken, everything along the way, but suddenly on this question for the census, it's right there. They're going to have that question on this next census document, just like that. So I think that you hit the nail on the head with regard to, let's say that it does, I'm glad that there are organizations that are fighting like crazy,
Right.
including all the way up to the Supreme Court, to prevent it from getting on the form. But if it does get on the form, we don't give up, right? What we're going to have to do is organize even harder and go and educate people about the fact that that information shall not be used for any other purpose. Because you know what they're trying to do. They're trying to scare people. Even if somebody is a citizen, they're afraid that if there might be somebody who is undocumented living in their household, that, like, I'm just not going to touch anything having to do with the government. I don't want the government having my information. I don't want to come in there. And why wouldn't they think that? Given the fear that this administration has encouraged, has fanned the flames up. You know, if I were in their position, I can understand the fear they have. We're going to have to educate folks. That's going to take resources. It's going to take time. It's going to take organization. And you know, I think the best thing we can do in that instance is for people to support those organizations and even volunteer to go help and educate people as much as you can, so that they know that they should fill out that census form, that by law that information cannot be used for any other purposes. And they should know that soon we're going to have a new president, a new administration that's going to change that.
There is a need for affordable housing in Cedar Rapids. I'm a case manager. I work in homeless in Cedar Rapids, the shelter center of the state. And my question to that is that when I struggle with this question about affordable housing, I guess my question to you is that, you know, how do we continue to peddle bad economics up against affordable housing? And what I mean about that is that how can you say affordable housing and people buy into affordable housing when the minimum wage is at $7.25 an hour? If you're looking at a single mother with 7 children at $7.25 an hour, and there is no male figure in the household, how do you equate that with affordable housing? I had the opportunity, I lived in Texas less than 10 years ago. I worked as an outreach worker in Austin, Texas. And on the other side of I-35, away from Street.
East Austin.
Yeah, East Austin. I worked in the areas of public housing. And some of that public housing that they considered affordable housing were built in 1925. They did nothing to try to resolve that, and it was just basic cinder block. But my question is, like, when do we stop the bad economics? Particularly the people that want to get out of poverty or work, and we created these other things like bad health, mental health, different things that put us in jeopardy of incarceration. So how do we resolve the wages in this country to match up with affordable housing?
And thank you very much for the work that you do. I know what a difference that work makes in people's lives. So thank you for doing it. Thanks for the question. I would say a couple of things. First, I think that your question points to the fact that all of these things are connected. Right? That's why we have to raise the minimum wage. That's why we should be supporting labor, so that they can make sure that people do get better wages in this country and better protections in their employment. It also points to the fact that, you know, oftentimes it's not enough for people to only have a place to live. There are also mental health or other services that they need. Oftentimes, people who are struggling with housing, you know, they don't have the skills. Some of them don't have the skills that are needed to be, you know, successful in the job market right now. And so when I was at HUD, the way that I used to think about it was that I saw the people that we were trying to serve as sort of, as sort of a planet that services that we want to ensure can help them reach prosperity would orbit around. So for instance, one of the things that we did was we created this thing called Connect Home with internet service providers and nonprofits to get broadband into the homes of families living in public housing so they would have access to the internet. Because a lot of these kids, they're trying to go to school and they get assignments that require them to go online. They don't have that connectivity at home. Parents that are looking for a job. We also stress something called Section 3, which basically says that when a housing authority goes out and they do contracting for renovating a development or other work, that they should work with companies, the contractors that they pay, to hire people that live in those areas, to provide greater economic opportunity for them. I also noticed during this administration, let me say something, a rare positive about this HUD administration. But early on, Secretary Carson talked about, I want to say they were called, they're opportunity zones, which are different from what I'm talking about, and he mentioned, they're like opportunity centers. But essentially the idea was that you would have these resources that people need, whether it's housing, it's employment, mental health, job training, education, in the vicinity of communities that really need it so that they can lift up and people can get on the productive path that they want and not need public housing anymore. The last thing I'll say is just that you brought up the east side of Austin. And it's true that the housing stock, because they have in Austin some of the original public housing that Lyndon B. Johnson advocated for when he was in Congress a long time ago. We marked the 50th anniversary of HUD when I was in office, and I went to the University of Texas at Austin, LBJ School, to deliver a speech about that. But there on the east side of Austin, one of the things that we've seen is tremendous displacement, gentrification. They've lost half of their black population over the last 15 years. And that east side of Austin, it used to be primarily African-American community, no longer is that. Is it, again, both when it comes to the individual and when it comes to the place, that we have to be thoughtful about the policies that we embrace so that people can rise up and reach their full potential. And then also they have the opportunity, if they want, to be able to live in their neighborhood of choice. And that's why we did things at HUD like affirmatively furthering fair housing, which said, under the 1968 Fair Housing Act, to communities that were getting federal taxpayer dollars through HUD, you have to get more serious about making sure there's equal housing opportunity throughout your jurisdiction, your city or county or a housing authority. And those are the kinds of ways that I would connect the dots if I'm president, not only with housing, but education, transportation, all of these different things.
We have time for one more. We're going to go to the back where these folks have been standing the whole time. So one more question, and then I'm sure there will be some time for photos.
Thank you. Sure. My name is Leslie Carpenter, and I'm an advocate for people with serious brain disorders like schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. I come to this as our
Speak
son.
up, please.
Sure. I'm a serious mental illness. I'm trying. Our son has had a mental illness for about the past 12 years and has been hospitalized 20 times. He's been in multiple different settings. You mentioned LBJ. LBJ did an act in 1965 that ended the ability for Medicaid federal dollars to be utilized for any facility with more than 16 beds dedicated for an institution or a hospital or any facility for mental disease. Ending the IMD exclusion could be a wonderful thing to include in a mental health policy plan. I'm wondering if you might consider that and whether or not you have a policy plan that might be helpful. Because, I just want to make one more point, solving that aspect of things opens up the access for everyone with any level of a mental illness all along that continuum of care. Ending the IMD exclusion would be the single most impactful thing to do to improve that.
Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. We'll go back and take a look at that. thank you for sharing the story of your son. Let me say, I think I mentioned to you a little bit earlier when we had a chance to chat briefly, that, well, first of all, I'm going to release my own approach on healthcare. But one of the things that I've been talking about is that we need to end the distinction between mental health care and physical health care in this country. And so that we take more seriously the fact that people have a condition, a mental health condition, that affects them every bit as much as a physical condition. And that we try and eliminate the stigma that too often goes with mental health care. When we do that, when we get to that point, when we're funding mental health appropriately, when we have the opportunity for people to see good doctors. Here in rural Iowa, I read about 2 months ago that over the last several years, 7 to 8 hospitals in rural Iowa had closed their inpatient psychiatric ward. Meaning that people don't have a place near them and they have to travel hours to go and get that kind of care, which is essential for their well-being. We need to fund that the way that it should be funded. It also means, for instance, that when we talk about gun violence, right, I support all of common sense gun reform, all of the things that you always hear about. It's also true that one of the leading ways that somebody dies is death by suicide. They're using a handgun. And why does that happen? Of course, it happens for different reasons, but one of the leading reasons is depression or something like bipolar disorder. So that when we make these investments and we ensure that people can get the care that they need, it's also going to do things like reduce the number of deaths by suicide and gun violence in our country, and have tremendous positive impacts on the lives of individuals and of their families. And so thank you for bringing that up. We'll take that to heart and go back and look at it. Perhaps if we can connect on that just so that we don't forget. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
All right, one more.
Is my mic going to work? Hi, my name is Mike Swallock. I'm a lecturer in International Studies and History at the University of Iowa. I want to thank you, Julian Castro, for being here today.
Can you hold the mic closer?
Yeah. For your, particularly for your policies like People First Education Plan, which calls for free college education, tuition, dramatically reducing student debt, financial counseling for students, and much more. Public education in Iowa and across the country is facing funding cuts and stagnant salaries for educators like me. The average pay for a full-time non-tenure track faculty member like me at Iowa is just over $48,000 a year. That's $7,000 less than the average salary for a K-12 teacher in Iowa, and we already agree that that's far too low. Some of our members are trying to raise families on part-time teacher salaries amounting to under $30,000 a year. I'm a proud member of Faculty Forward Iowa, and we have been organizing for the last 2 years now, making progress. We've won expanded benefits, insurance, retirement, sick leave for over 80 of our colleagues and their families. We're currently working with the administration on a policy to ensure fair medical leave for faculty dealing with catastrophic health situations. But Iowa's rigged labor laws have made it extremely difficult for workers like us to form a union, and Iowa has stripped away many of our collective bargaining rights. In fact, our employer, the University of Iowa, has claimed many times in the past year that they won't even talk to us, simply because we claim the title of a union, despite the fact that we're not even asking for collective bargaining. You've come out in support of faculty forming unions across the nation, so as part of your education plan, my question to you is what tangible steps will you take to ensure faculty, whether tenured, full-time, or part-time, are able not only form unions in the workplace, but also have strong collective bargaining rights?
Thank you very much. We had a chance to chat a little bit earlier, but I mentioned that, and y'all will have to forgive me, like a lot of the candidates, traveling so much, and I forget, was that 3 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago? About a month ago, I was in California, in San Francisco, joining workers at the University of California, San Francisco, who were striking and pushing for reforms in the University of California system on wages and also the ability to organize. And I do support that. I would appoint people to the National Labor Relations Board that will make rulings that allow for people to organize, I think, in a more convenient and effective way, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. What we see in the public sector with this Janus decision in the Supreme Court is that a lot of public sector unions are now in danger of not being able to continue or being a lot weaker because of loss of membership. And so I think we should look at how we reverse that through legislation. Is there a way to go around that decision? And then put pressure on those university systems in these states through the power of our funding, because we do provide a lot of federal dollars to university systems across this country of allowing their workers to organize effectively. And what I see in higher education over the last few decades is that it kind of mirrors some of what the private sector is doing, right? This independent contractor model. What they'll do is they'll hire more adjunct faculty. Maybe some of y'all have been an adjunct faculty member. I have done that once or twice, but you don't get paid anything. You don't get paid benefits. Basically making, if you're an adjunct faculty member, a few $1,000s, even if you're a full-time faculty member. Tenure has gotten changed in different systems. It's harder to get tenure than it used to be. So we will do what we can, both with a carrot and a stick, to help ensure that people are able to organize in these state university systems and other public education systems.
And so I think now we are going to probably start lining up for some photos. Cynthia, I don't know where you, just right here.
Just like 30 seconds, I just
Right
want to
here.
say thank you all very much. Also, I hope you'll watch the debate on June 26th. Can help you get there, because we need the $65,000 donors. Thank you for that. We need 130 to get on the September one, so go back and get your friends to do that. Thank you.